lead researcher at the Benchmarks Foundation, David van Wyk, has blamed Ailing infrastructure for the explosion. Van Wyk says gas pipes, the pipelines that is, are not being maintained in the city. So far, one person has been reported dead, while 41 others are being treated in hospital. Van Wyk joining me now to elaborate on the state of the city's infrastructure. Mr. Van Wyk, hopefully you can hear me. I think the picture to you just went off, so I'm just going to try and put the question to you. When you say that the pipelines are not being maintained in the city of Johannesburg, what do you mean exactly?
Well, I think that, the pipelines in Johannesburg are very old. They date back to the 19th century, early 20th century, before electricity even came in and so on. And then gradually they expanded as the city expanded as well. And the problem in Breer Street or Lillian Ngoyi is that it's close to the taxi rank area there. And we know that Park Station, for example, has been stripped of railway lines and things like that. And there's a lot of asset stripping taking place in the city, all over the city. If you look at the railings of the highways and so on, they're also being stripped and so on. So the problem with scrap metal dealers and scrap metal thieves is a real problem in the city of Johannesburg. And, these old tunnels and things that run under the city with regard to gas supply, water supply, electricity supply and so on are at great risk of this kind of thing. We have seen electricity substations and so on blow up in the past. So people have now discovered that they can probably get access to the gas and went under.
Mr. Van Wyk, if you can, while we are talking, try switch on your camera because the picture to you is actually quite clear and we'd love to see your face. But let's continue the conversation because, interesting now that you mentioned, because I was going to ask you the question about when you say pipelines, what kind of pipelines? So you've already outlined.
I can't hear you.
All right. Now the sound to you has completely gone off. All right. We're going to try and fix this with my team. All right. Let's try and take you back to that conversation with the lead researcher at the Benchmarks Foundation, David van Wyk. David, good morning to you once again, and thank you very much for your patience. All right, for a viewer who may have missed where we started off, just outline for us the kind of pipelines that run under the tunnels in the Johannesburg CBD.
Yes, you have the gasworks situated quite close to SABC in Auckland Park, that area. And then from there, gas is fed through to the rest of the city. There are also very important gasworks along Main Reef Road, just north of, or just south of Langlaagte, from where the gas comes into the city. And then from there, it goes to various distribution points throughout the city. Now, the problem with gas in the city, and this is a problem in all cities, in New York, it's a problem. In many American cities, it's a problem. In Taiwan, it's a problem. All these places, you've had very major gas explosions in the past. Now, the problem is that if you don't maintain the gas pipelines and the tunnels, then you're not going to know what state they are in. But besides that, we are having a situation of asset stripping taking place in Johannesburg due to poverty and inequality and homelessness and so on. People are basically stealing whatever is metallic or copper to sell to scrap metal dealers. And when people get access to these pipelines and so on, they can tamper with valves and so on, and it can result in a major problem. Now, the pressure in that pipeline wasn't very big, so the explosion was fairly limited compared to explosions in other countries where the gas was running at full steam. So it was a fairly contained area in which this explosion took place in Johannesburg. But if you look at that area of Lillian Ngoyi, Breer Street, where the taxi rank is and so on, it's quite close to the station where already asset stripping of railway lines and so on has happened. And I think that if we want to look at the problems of our infrastructure, we also need to secure them and make sure that there's 24-hour surveillance, especially of something like gas, because it can result in a major disaster for people living in very densely populated areas.
Yeah. David, something that can only be referred to as pure speculation was said last night by one of the MMCs in Johannesburg, Kenny Kunene, who almost sought to draw comparisons between what happened in Germiston at that informal settlement where there was a gas leak and what has happened in Johannesburg with this explosion, pointing somewhat to illegal mining. Is that something that we could potentially, or should authorities be looking at?
No. I think Kenny Kunene is completely off the mark. In Germiston, it was gas cylinders that contained nitrous oxide, and it was cylinders that people got probably from scrap metal dealers as well, not knowing the content. They were probably looking for butane or methane. When they take the gold out of the rock using mercury, they have to burn the mercury away to leave the gold behind. Now, what you're having in the city center of Johannesburg is a gas pipeline. It's got nothing to do with mining. The nearest mining is south of the M2 East, M2 West, where the old mines used to be, or Main Reef Road. All the mines were located to the south of those two roads. None of the mining operations went as far north as Breer Street or Lillian and Goy, and that in any case is a granitic dome. There was no gold in that granitic dome. The gold occurs in conglomerate formations that are to the south of Johannesburg.
Yeah, all right. But I guess just to be crystal clear, what I think Kenny Kunene was trying to say is that just as there is illegal mining activity in the areas of Boksburg or Germiston, there could be, these could be the consequences of illegal mining down here in Johannesburg. Is it still wrong?
Well, no, I think that it's illegal asset stripping, and it really has to do with poverty. You know, people are desperately poor, and the economic downturn has made even more people poor than what they were before. And so what you are having is it really is a form of mining.
I think your sound has gone off. Your sound has gone off there, David. Oh, I still can't hear David in my ear. All right. I think you may have muted there, David van Wyk. Sorry about that. Let's see if David is going to try and reconnect. I think we may possibly struggle here. All right. I do hear some sound. Okay. All right. Looks like you're back. Okay.
Yeah, so asset stripping can be considered as a form of mining in that you are taking metallic objects and so on, fences, railings, substation, copper, the valves on pipelines and things like that, and go and sell to scrap metal dealers. It really is important for the government to take control of the scrap metal industry in South Africa, because is where the stripping is coming from. And basically at the moment there is no control.
All right. David, I'm going to try and pose the last question, and while I do that, I'm going to ask you to just see if you can make your camera landscape. Hopefully that won't interrupt the sound to you. Another suggestion was made here, David van Wyk, and that is that perhaps what needs to be looked at is the piping that was possibly laid down by the old mining companies. And what are we talking about? JCI, Anglo Gold, and another, Hans Merensky, something like that. But basically they're suggesting that stagnant water reacts with iron in order to form a very toxic and explosive hydrogen sulfide. This is a suggestion made by someone. Do you think that old mining companies could potentially be held responsible, or perhaps could be pointed at as being possibly the culprits for what happened?
Well, I think that if you look at the pipeline, the gas pipeline that runs between Soccer City and Mooifontein Mine Dump and Shaft 17 Mine Dump, there you can have the potential because the pipeline is very close to the mine dump. And so there the runoff of the water would be mixing with iron and iron oxides and a variety of other sulfuric-based metals that could erode a pipeline. But those are very far from the city. The people who really should be worried there are the people in River Lee and so on that are right next to, and the pipeline runs right through the middle of the community, and they're right next to those mine dumps. But there are no mine dumps in the city center. And the city center mine dumps were put in by the municipality of Johannesburg under apartheid, under colonialism, and it is. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah, okay, no, that's great. So that maintenance is not happening. This happens in countries where very often what used to be state entities are privatized. You know, in the United States, you had a gas explosion in Portland in 2015, in Durham in 2019, in East Harlem in 2014, in East Village in 2015. Yeah. In all of those cases, lots of people died and lots of damage was caused. You know, so we really need to get a state that is prepared, A, to regulate, and B, to govern, and C, to take critical infrastructure and take control of it and make sure that it's maintained, and that while services are provided, no one actually interferes with it.
Well, this is a very important point that you make now, David, because I was prepared to let you go. But finally, you mentioned that there are people who live in and around this infrastructure. How safe is it for people, particularly who are on those buildings that are directly at the epicenter of where this happened? Because there does not seem to be a central message for people to either evacuate or perhaps stay inside your building up until the authorities say it's safe. What should be the message from government?
Well, we tried to look at the disaster management plan of Johannesburg City some years ago already, because we were concerned that possibly illegal mining, but also the abandonment of mines could pose a threat with regard to the gas pipelines that run across these mines. And we couldn't find a disaster management plan, which should be a public document. Every citizen, every resident of Johannesburg should have access to that disaster management plan on the internet. We also discovered that there's one disaster management officer for every 80,000 residents. Then that's really ridiculous. You can't have that imbalance between disaster management officers and the number of residents in the town. You know, so that comes from cutting back on budgets and things like that for disaster management and safety. It's just like with the Jagersfontein disaster, there was no disaster management plan either by the mining company or the local government. In Machebeng, I find one disaster management officer for Windelsrus, Welkom, Virginia, Allen Ridge, a vast area. One old man is in charge of disaster management in that vast area and so on. Basically, the law says that there must be disaster management plans in every local government. And unfortunately, I can tell you there isn't.
Well, that's worrying. Thank you very much for that information. A lead researcher at Benchmarks Foundation is David van Wyk. Is there a disaster management plan to the authorities now? Well, perhaps this is probably one of the key questions we've got to ask.